Week 37 of connecting the dots with people I know or don't know. Usually I'm chatting to people I don't know and finding more about them. This week I get to chat to somebody I've known for a long time. And Caboolture Boy, haven't known him since, that long, but certainly a decade. I see him quite regularly, but didn't really know much about him other than why I see him. That's all going to make sense real soon. Come meet I think he referred to his early days profession as some type of setter. Let's go see what he's talking about. This is Matt, or Dr. Matt. And why, let's start with that. Why is it Dr. Matt and not Dr. Doyle, or is it both?
Well, so like in Australia, like as a chiropractor, you can call yourself Dr. Matthew Doyle, chiropractor. So you're going to qualify it as chiropractor because you're not a medical practitioner. The only things in actual legislation are you're a doctor if you're a medical practitioner or if you've got a PhD. I'm 80% through the PhD, so like working on that part of it. But I think in terms of how we talk in the practice, there's a connection as a doctor-patient relationship, and that changes over time because people come and see us with specific issues they want dealt with. And so you are the authority figure to deal with, musculoskeletal and other things to do with your spine. But over time, we become more of that connection for them on a journey of health. Depending on where they met, they might come to us when they're an elite athlete. They might come to us when they're being carried in the door. So like there's a really broad spectrum that we take them on that journey. And so depending on where they are on that spectrum sort of really leads into which part of that the communication comes from.
Awesome. So you're a chiropractor?
Yep.
How long have you been doing
practice? 19 years.
Now I've seen, I'm a patient of yours, but I also follow you online. You do teaching as well.
Yep. Yeah. Like I love I love the specific impact that chiropractic had on my family, my parents, us, my kids, and that drives why I do what we're doing. But what I can do in practice as one person has a greater limit in terms of its bigger influence. And then over the time in practice, like I've worked on publications and then looking after babies and pregnant women. So I love that area. And then being able to share that sort of both clinical experience and what the research says at this point in time about those areas and, general chiropractic education. Like I love being able to influence, one to many in that sense, because that then helps, educate and inspire people who want to be chiropractors or who are chiropractors, continue to grow their journey as well to help more people.
So where did you study? Is that something you can study for in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. So where I study is interesting because I'm up to, the PhD is degree number 5. So like when I started, I went to Caboolture High. So, right. Being local in the area, you can study chiropractic in Australia. Absolutely. There's at the moment you can do it at CQU in Brisbane. It was Mackay as well, but they're focused now on Brisbane as the main campus. Then Macquarie in Sydney, you can do it. They're finishing up RMIT's program in Melbourne, which has been there for almost 50 years, and they're starting. The Australian Chiropractic College has got a cohort starting there. You can study it now in Adelaide. It's been there for almost 5 years. They've just had their first cohort of graduates from the Australian Chiropractic College, which is like a private program, running it accredited the same way the universities are, but based in Adelaide. Murdoch University's over in Perth. That's been running since the early 2000s. And then you can go to New Zealand as well. So that sort of gives you the chiropractic options. When I looked at it, you could pretty much go to RMIT in Melbourne or Macquarie. Those are the two options. So I had done my science degree here at UQ. And so I did that in neurobiology. So I was really interested in the nervous system. So all the different specifications, you're looking at fish that can see 3,000 meters under the sea. And you look at bats that can hear stuff like in a 0.1% range and a 60,000 hertz range, like a butterfly that they're going to catch, rustling bush. It's amazing stuff. So I love the idea of the nervous system. And then, chiropractic was very much focused on, function and structure for the nervous system related to the spine and then health. So that sort of led me then going down to RMIT. So I went through UQ for the science degree, RMIT for my chiropractic degree, which was 5-year double degree. And in Australia, it's either a double degree or a bachelor's master's, same sort of content really. Yeah, the universities can charge a lot more for a master's program, so some will run it that way. And they could do a bit more research in that sense as well. So I finished RMIT program 19 years ago and then moved straight to the UK. So then I lived there for 7 years. And while I was there, I was wanting to do more study into aspects of chiropractic. And I was really interested in family care and looking after babies and pregnant women. So then I went down the path of a master's in pediatric chiropractic. I looked at research when I was doing my science degree, and I can clearly remember sitting outside the health sciences library at UQ, having just written 4,000 words on how like chemotaxis gets a nerve cell from your brain stem to the top of your nose, like 4,000 words on that much space. And I'm like, if I want to go back into more research, I'll do it once I get a professional qualification. So I started doing that master's program to kind of get some of the research tools, but then build skills around family-based care. And when I finished that, I had the opportunity to start teaching at one of the programs in Europe, Barcelona College of Chiropractic. So I was living in Glasgow and I'd leave -2 degrees in snow in Glasgow and then fly to the Mediterranean and teach in 12 degrees for like, Monday to Tuesday type of thing, and then fly back. So that was a great into chiropractic education. And that sort of educational thing then part of what happened was I met my now wife, Megan, who's an amazing chiropractor. And we decided to move back out of the UK. We're kind of done with the rain at that point in time. I loved it for the skiing because you get to Europe, but it was just, we were done, visas were done. So we looked at going to Barcelona, but just trying to work out how family would work and have kids and flying parents in, we couldn't get our heads around that properly. So we moved back here to Mackay, which is when CQ opened up their chiropractic program back in 2013. So I moved back to Mackay and then we're there for a year. They opened a campus in Brisbane. We had a lot more family down here. We were getting married. So we moved down to Brisbane. And that's when, we bumped into each other because I'd talked to Kevin and Carmen Kramer and they had a practice and they had young kids and they were about to move to Canada. So we were able to sort of, glide into the practice there. And then here we are 11 years later.
Yeah, wow. It's like you got the teaching and the travel out of the way early.
Yeah, it certainly started. But even when I was doing part of what CQU encouraged was any academic. So when you're teaching, you should have a qualification above the level you're teaching. So like for a chiropractic program, I had a master's, so that's the sort of thing you needed. But they also encourage you to do more in terms of educational academics. So I did a grad cert in tertiary education as well, which was another year's program on like how to teach at a university level. And that was really fascinating. And I actually loved learning like more about pedagogy and andragogy and how people learn and different processes of doing that, like lived experience work and just different concepts you could link to help someone understand a topic to get the outcome for what you want for that particular subject. So that was an interesting thing to bounce into the educational side of things.
You mentioned you went to Caboolture High. So you're a Caboolture boy. Your dad's been around for a while.
Bribie Bulldogs captain, my friend.
Right, right. Tell us about your dad.
Well, look,
why is that a name people might know?
Well, I mean, Tom Doyle's been here. He's been a vet in the area since 1976.
There you go.
So he's still practicing. In a lot of ways, he's an inspirational person to think of what's possible. He's 81. He's still practicing. He's still riding horses. He's still fit, active. Like, it's a part of that. He got chiropractic care. That's part of what helped him on his journey. But a big part of it is about having the mental drive to do what you love and like finding something that you love doing in terms of being a vet and riding horses and having a lifestyle and being able to, create that process that allows that to happen. So that's where I was this morning doing 3 hours of yard work with him to look after the 12 acres. So I think that's a really important thing from we've got a population that's aging, the dealing with the health of the aging population is a really important thing. And, doing something you love, being active, dealing with animals is another good thing. We know that like the literature is clear on having a dog particularly is a good thing from a longevity point of view. And being outside and doing things, weight-bearing activity, that sort of stuff is really important for, strength and muscle mass and functional capacity to get up and down off chairs and things. So, that's one of the things that I love that he's done for a 50-plus year career as a vet and 30-plus years as an animal chiropractor. So, it's cool.
Why would somebody need or want to go to a chiropractor? And I say that being, I've used isn't used. I've used
Yeah.
your services or the services of a chiropractor for my parents started taking me when I was 5. So it's
Yeah.
one of those things I've never had to turn my mind to why go to a chiropractor.
Yeah.
I always have. So for somebody that's never been to a chiropractor, what's the motivation to go?
Well, I think humans on the planet, we're bipedal, we're upright against gravity. We have this amazing bony structure that protects your nervous system. Your nervous system is what runs the show. Like that's what allows you to experience life. Sight, touch, sound, hearing, senses of smell. You got other bits of senses of movement. That's really important, proprioception. And so much of that proprioception is driven by spinal joint and muscle movement. And you get a chunk from your arms and legs, but the biggest bit that helps you stay upright against gravity, which is really important when you got 2 legs and an unstable base, is the function of your spine. Now, prior to probably the Industrial Revolution, we just had humans as a species were much more active. Like we didn't really exist as a profession. There's bone setters in like the 16th century that were around. But the modern form of chiropractic that started in 1895 with D.E. Palmer was really focused on the difference of 2 people in the same room, working at the same bench, eating the same food, and one was sick and one was well. That was the question that drove what D.D. Palmer looked at. And he went into looking at the spine and then its relationship to the nervous system and function and health in that point in time. So I think why would someone see a chiropractor? Well, as a human on the planet, we do stuff to our bodies that, we damage things over time, where there's a limitation in matter, and keeping your body functioning well in all aspects is a really important part. The spine's a critical part of that. So I think as a society, particularly when we are a more sedentary society in the Western world, making sure you take care of that spine is a critically important thing from a health and functional capacity point of view. Now, there's other professions that look after spines and look after people's health, osteos, physios, musculoskeletal therapists do a 3-year degree and that sort of thing. But what I guess makes chiropractic separate and distinct is the perspective that if your spine's not working well, if you've got what we call a subluxation or a lack of normal motion in that joint, then it has the potential to affect the quality of the signal between your brain and your body. And if that signaling system is clear, it's kind of like having a camera lens and it's a bit fuzzy, just your perception of everything going on, whether it's how you emote, because we know there's some stuff coming out around prefrontal cortex function and emotional regulation. This isn't randomized controlled trial level for its impact on people's health. We know from RCT level work now that people getting specifically adjusted for areas in the neck that aren't moving properly has a positive effect on the prefrontal cortex. So that's really, really important from an emotional regulation point of view. More importantly, we know that if you've got stuck joints in your spine, your picture of how your body moves through space is like that camera lens, it's fuzzy. And if it's fuzzy, it means if you're trying to step up over the carpet here, you're more likely to catch a toe and slip and jar something. And it might be at your vintage, you just jar something a little bit. And that might be something that 3 weeks later is like, oh, that's not quite right. But if you're in this aging population too, if you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, that little slip could be enough to fall over, break a hip. And then there's a cascading event the next year that's not good for people's longevity. So really it's about optimizing one of the key things, your spine, that supports the function of your nervous system, and your nervous system is what allows you to do your life in all aspects.
Yeah, wow. Now, as the person that's doing this to somebody else, is it taxing on your body?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, over time.
Why I ask that is I've watched even in my time seeing you've used your fist as a tool when you're adjusting me.
Yep.
And now you have this device you put in your hand and I said, oh, you've moved on to using this device. And you were like, well, I've been doing it for this many years and this many times and this many adjustments. I've probably used my fist as a tool, and you spat out this number and I'm like, oh, that would be taxing on your body.
Yeah. Yeah, particularly with manual adjusting. That's what I've done most of the 2 decades I've worked. Yeah, it's a physical art. We're talking about the art, science, and philosophy of chiropractic. The philosophy gives us the why we do it, that spinal nervous system and dealing with your life. The science gives us the understanding of biomechanics and the integration between the nervous system and different organ systems and the literature around the importance of normal motion things. But then the art is really, really important. There's an art to any physical thing. If you're playing NRL, if you're in the Australian cricket team, there's an art that you have to build to get to that level to be able to perform. And that's a key thing that chiropractors are trained in through their education. I remember in first year, first week, we started doing postural assessments. You start getting hands-on with the other students so that you can start to feel what joints are like. And I always likened it to a martial art. If you do a martial art twice a week for 3 years, you're pretty much a black belt. Doesn't matter what you do. So that's where most chiropractic students should get to by the time they start their student clinic. And then you start to go, if you're a martial artist, you're doing 3 or 4 sessions a week for the next 2 years. That gets you the first or second dan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you practice that. And I still do continuing education. We have to do, I think it's 24 or 30 hours a year CPD. Like most years will do 300 plus because I just like learning stuff. So outside of chiropractic, I played national level basketball when I was in the UK. I played state level cricket when I was a kid here. So I'm used to performing at a high level, but to do that, you need coaching and training. Yeah, and you need people to feed back on what you're doing. So in chiropractic practice, technique, Megan and I go into a seminar in a couple of weeks' time to do more technique practice. So there's that aspect of learning the art so that you can deliver force as well to the spine, which is a robust, piece of physiology, but also you want the high quality skill set to be able to help that effectively. And you want the techniques to minimize the stress and strain on your body because most chiropractors usually work for 40 years. So I think about it with Dad and animal chiropractic, he's done that for 30 plus years. It's some of that, particularly with horses, is quite hard on your arms and your wrists and things. So there's an importance to looking after the technique side of things because you can absolutely strain things, if you get sloppy with it, or if you do it for a long time, there is a limitation on that. There's a reason elite athletes are 35 or less usually, unless you're LeBron James.
Yeah. Outside of being a chiropractor, what fills your time?
Kids.
Yep.
Young kids, they're young primary school age. So that's awesome. Mm-hmm. That's a key part of it. I'm 6 months off, 3 months off finishing a PhD. So that takes a chunk of time. I'm not in practice as much as I was because I wanted to, I think that's an interesting thing. When we looked at, before we had kids, we looked at, values and priorities. And for both of us in our relationship, the family side of things was really important. And managing a work-life balance was super important. So we were able to structure our working week so that we both, me and I both had, time with kids and time together. And there's been times where we haven't got that balance as good, particularly on managing the time together. But, you find that balance there to make sure that you got the first maybe 5 to 7 years, if you're lucky with kids, where you really build that connection and you get through half the time you're going to spend with your kids by that stage. That goes.
Yep.
So we made a really conscious effort to manage time in practice, because we were building a practice and having young kids, with spending time with the kids. So that was a really important aspect of that. I mean, outside of that, I loved an old man basketball run up the coast. It's good to have, that sort of social connection with, particularly with a bunch of guys that are, on my 40s there and they're 50s, 60s, 70s. One guy's 80, and it's great being around people that are still functional and active and skilled. Most of the people we do this old man basketball run with have played A level of some sort, and a lot of people have played NBL or country representation sort of thing. So I love doing those bits. And there's always bits about fitness too. I grew up on horses. I grew up playing basketball and cricket. Being active was always a big part of it. So there's this chunk of time every week that's just, important to engage in so that you stay healthy.
Yeah.
And that varies over the years, whether it was CrossFit for a while or, national level basketball or, more targeted work at home type of thing. So
do chiropractors see other chiropractors?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, in my experience, in the circles that I have, the people that look at chiropractic as a great way to look after the musculoskeletal side of health and manage neck and back issues, but also then from a personal point of view, wanting to use it to help optimize, function for my body to enhance the experience of life. So that's something that I get checked every week or two. And that's 30 years in.
Yeah.
So that's a personal sort of approach I'll take to it.
It could be just my perspective of living out in the burbs all my life, but I often see that chiropractors are small business owners. You don't see it's different to other when you look at physios or doctors, you see big surgeries and there's lots of, employed practitioners. Why is there this? Why are chiropractors always small business owners as well?
Or it's an interesting thing. And I think it's globally there's an element of growth in the utilization of chiropractic services in an integrated health setting. For most of the last 120 plus years that the chiros have been around, they have been small business owners. That's what we've done for 11 years. It gives you in a lot of ways that freedom to manage the practice and time as best fits your life. It's interesting with some of like the World Federation of Chiropractic, which is the largest global chiropractic organization. They have quite a drive on integration in aspects, and there's some of the other countries are a little more advanced than Australia. I mean, the US military has had chiropractors as part of their service for I think 15 years now. That's something I'd love to see the Australian government do a lot more of. We take care of lots of DVA people, people that are ex-military, and you can see, with those guys, like because DVA helps with that, there's not a cost to them to come. So we see people like that because they get results. They feel and function better. Like there's something that's very beneficial that they find out of that. One of my experiences as a practitioner with them, particularly ex-military, is like just their bandwidth for dealing with stress generally is way better. And that's such an important thing, whether it's ex-military or just people in the post-COVID world, like dealing with stress better, such a big thing. So that's a common thing that we see there. One of my colleagues is working in, there's the big medical center just behind the practice. He's been in there as a practitioner for the last couple of years. So it's sort of a growth area, I think. There's discussions actually going on between, aspects of the chief health officer and CGU and our national association to get CGU chiropractic students, trying to get them accredited with Queensland Health so that they can go in and do more of that. So there's been barriers more so politically to some of those things, but those are breaking down. Even my time in Caboolture, like I've found, we've grown year on year with referrals that we get from the local medical practitioners because there's, these chronic disease management programs that they can refer for 5 visits that people can access with chronic issues. Hopefully over time that transitions into something that more of the general populace could use, half a dozen visits a year that, our tax money helps optimize spinal mechanics along with, doing some of the physical therapy or, seeing the dietitian or having a talk to the psychologist. Like there's these things where on a bigger picture as a nation, I think we can have a broader conversation about enhancing health capacities as opposed to mitigating disease processes only. We're good at that, like the emergency side of healthcare, like there's aspects we're really good at, but I think there's a lot that can be done in that proactive approach to health for the population. And you're starting to see more of that integration process where I think chiropractic and the perspective we bring to helping on a continuum from disease to health can be part of that conversation. So I know our national associations engage with lots of the health ministers in the last 6 months about those sort of concepts as well. And we had the shadow federal health minister in the practice along with our federal member a few months back just to have a look at the practice and look at some of the kids being checked and talk about those type of things. So I love that. And I've seen that all around the country, like politicians taking a bit more interest in looking at chiropractic as part of that bigger healthcare team and what they may have to offer in that space.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because it wasn't that long ago where, just saying that you go to a chiropractor would be met by some people in the community going, oh, they just crack necks or oh, that stuff leads to strokes. Where did that come from? Were people doing it bad or is there bad apples out there? Or was there just this, is it a fear thing? Where did the bad concept of it come from?
It's a good question, right? So there's multiple parts of that. I think there's the bad apple part of it. Like, I mean, you go to a mechanic, you go to a commercial leasing premises, you go to a GP, like everyone will find people they resonate with and do a better job. That's why most, particularly in a healthcare point of view, you have a regulation and a profession's capacity to self-regulate is really important. And the APRA does that part of that job. And then you have all the boards that sit below that for the different health professions. With chiropractic in particular, there's still a long hangover from the American Medical Association had a committee on quackery for almost 40 years. There's a finding that after like a 15-year battle went to, I think it's the Supreme Court in the US, and Judge Getzendana, made a ruling saying that the AMA had this committee whose express purpose was to denigrate and destroy the chiropractic profession. So this was a top level Supreme Court finding that this was actively happening for decades. They had to print a retraction in the American Medical Association's journal, and I think it was published again in 2011. The UK and America, like there's a hangover of that then flowed onto, well, because the AMA had this issue with chiropractors, that flowed into Australia because we looked at the US as the best place to go, and you go to Harvard and all these sorts of places to get your education. So that political flow on, I think, happened in Australia, and that's one of the things I've noticed in the time of the last decade here is that shift in local GPs' perspectives. Like we've grown every year with our referrals from GPs, and part of that's communication. Like just sending a letter back and engage in that conversation is important. But that's where a lot of those thoughts and concerns people raise with, and things like the stroke issue was put to bed years ago now in terms of like massive level RCT assessments and data analysis, where like usually people that are having strokes, issues with blood supply to your brain, like most of the time they're having a stroke and they go and see a GP or a chiropractor. There wasn't, in the biggest studies done to date, the Cassidy studies, there isn't a difference in terms of relative risk whether you see a GP or a chiropractor. It's just like there's a limitation of matter and something bad with your neck's going on. So that sort of deals with that type of stroke issue. I'm optimistic about the environment in Australia and what's happened with people's, COVID was great in some ways for people's perspective on healthcare. Like, oh, actually, the people that did worse with it weren't really healthy anyway. So, the more that you can take some of that self-responsibility for health, that helps you drive forward and make healthier decisions over time. It sort of goes back to where we start with, there's that doctor-patient relationship that transfers to more of a, walking side by side with someone and being a source of information and a feedback point to help someone on that journey.
So, it's long been thought, I guess, for people that sit in office chairs all day long and slumping over and stuff like that. What's your thoughts on a stand-up desk?
I love them.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so where I have my desk at home, like I've got a corner desk, but then I've got like a set of shelves that fits perfectly for my laptop. So I can just go and use that as a stand-up desk. So it's something I use. Humans, as we talked about this earlier, like bipedal organisms, we've been around as a species for 100,000 plus years. You go back to Homo erectus and going towards chimp linkages millions of years ago. We're upright on two legs. So our systems are designed to get better feedback, and our brain functions better when we get more regular symmetrical information coming in, and standing up is a great part of that.
Yeah. Well,
So having a good setup helps too. I mean, making sure it's a bit cushioned and it's the right heights, and there's all those, like the minutiae of detail for getting it set up right. But the general idea of a stand-up desk is a great idea.
yeah, awesome. If you could change one thing in the industry, what would you change?
In the industry, that's a really good question. Like, I think enhancing communication between, the institutions, researchers, and practitioners. Like, I think that's a really important part of that is making sure there's a good two-way flow of information, because we live in a world of evidence-based practice, and we want to use the best available evidence we have. We've got a clinical experience, and then what the person who's coming to see us is after. So that's evidence-based practice. Most things that are researched are usually years behind what's happening in practice, because you have to have had some case studies to say, hey, this is an interesting, this person's having some changes in their gut but they noticed that when they're under care. So then we go and do like a cohort studies, and there's a bunch of people this happened for. Well, then we got to do a randomized controlled trial, and then you go on a bigger randomized controlled trial and then that's got to replicate in other parts of the world to then build a higher level of evidence for that particular intervention for a condition. I love the concept of looking at what we do as a profession helps individuals express life well. It helps them have a healthier spinal nervous system. Good health as a result of that particularly deals with musculoskeletal issues. Yeah, that's a really important perspective. If we start with, we just deal with MSK issues, neck pain and back pain, which we have high level evidence for, then you miss out on all these other things that I've seen clinically in practice with hundreds and thousands of people over the time. So that's a really, that's an important part of the profession. It's why I'm involved in various boards and, and committees and things to help with that two-way feedback between the profession, the practitioners, the researchers, what the current evidence is, where the research is being done on what stuff. And that sort of complex interplay, I think that's the better that gets over time, the more you have research guided in areas that are relevant to real world practice, but then also, have the utility of being assessed in a high level understanding of the scientific method so that you get clear pictures on what interventions for outcomes mean for people in different states of health.
Yeah, awesome. What's the future hold for Dr. Matt? I mean, you're working on a PhD. Is that the last year study? What, you've already done some travel? Do you travel again?
I think my wife would cheat me if I started to go down another academic route, another study route straight away. So I've done 4 years of teaching to this point already. Outside of that was in 2 different institutions, so CQ and Barcelona. So I'd love to do more on the academic side of things down the track. Yeah, the kids are young. Like, we've got a good caravan. We're going to go and do some more of that next year, so we can see more of the country.
Yep.
We did Cape York this year. It was amazing. But having the vehicle set up so we could be remote and like on some of the places that it's not easy to get to. I love that side of adventuring. It's one of the things I loved about Europe is like I went to a different country every month for 7 years.
Yeah, wow.
There's a lot to see in the world. And I think, it goes back to that work-life family balance. It like over the next year or so, like the kids are just about transitioning into that sort of middle school and going into high school. So they're still in that kid stage. They're able to go out and do stuff. So we've got an amazing country. So it's good to go and see a bit of that while we can, because you build memories and connections that, you never lose, whatever happens down the track, and they'll go and explore and have their own amazing journeys that we get to support. But it's not far from where that becomes you more of the back seat. So there'll be some adventures to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much for chatting to me today.
I appreciate it, man. That's awesome.
Cheers, mate. Do you have a brother that lives a chiropractor?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He's in Newcastle. So
how does a vet from Caboolture end up with 2 sons as chiropractors, though? What do you think? Where did that come from?
Well, so he'd had neck and back pain for 20 years, and then he'd seen other health practitioners, physios, GPs, a lot of good people over years, and he got some relief but hadn't sorted it. Pat, who works for him, had gone and seen Mark Hossels, who was working literally where we bought the practice of the Kramers, where Richardson and Renshaw.
Yeah, yep.
They're in that building. So he went there, and 6 weeks later, his neck and back was starting to feel better, and the asthma he'd had his whole life went away. And then the rest of the family came in and got checked.
Right.
So that's 30 years ago.
Yeah, gotcha.
So that was the instigating change.
Yeah.
He started
Inception point.
Yeah. Well, very much so. He'd had as a vet, he also had looked at some of the Chinese med stuff and some acupuncture. His use of pharmacological things is lower than most vets because, he tries some more natural things first. But there's time and a place for drugs. But he looked at these areas and he started looking at animal chiropractic as he started getting adjusted. And then he went and studied in the US for a couple of years. He went over for a month at a time to the US to do animal chiropractic studies.
Yeah, wow.
Because I remember that, I was a teenager. So I had to look after, 2 stallions and 10 horses on the property whilst, in the middle of winter because it was summer over there.
Yeah.
That was all part of the process. And then when RMIT ran an animal chiropractic program, he went and did that postgrad diploma, a 2-year program there to finish the qualification. And so because he'd been doing some of the work already, he helped with some of the demonstration in the early stages for the RMIT animal chiropractic program. So then he was involved for a little while with the Australian Veterinary Chiropractic Association, which is now the Australian Animal Biomechanical Association. So,
Right.